U.S. edges closer to the fiscal cliff as President Obama looks to his old allies to end the standoff. I'm Philip Yen in Washington.
And I'm Karina here with the NASDAQ market site in Times Square, New York. A wild ride on Wall Street. U.S. stocks rally back as investors embrace upbeat comments from Capitol Hill on the fiscal cliff negotiations.
Welcome to Biz Asia America. Coming up this hour, we'll take a look at the U.S. real estate market recovery and why it may be too early to call it a true comeback. And in our focus on China, how the U.S. fiscal cliff could complicate matters for the mainland economy's future growth. And we'll also take a look at how one of China's richest men is trying to convince President Obama to let his company expand in the United States. But first, we head to Elaine Reyes for more of what's happening at the UN headquarters in New York City.
All right, thanks a lot, Philip. With just hours to go before the UN votes on the Palestinian bid for non-member observer status, the international community is weighing in. On Wednesday, the UK laid out its vision of the Palestinian issue.
We support a negotiated settlement leading to a safe and secure Israel, living alongside a viable and sovereign Palestinian state based on 1967 borders with agreed land swaps, Jerusalem as the shared capital of both states, and a just, fair and agreed settlement for refugees.
The British Foreign Secretary also revealed two demands that the Palestinians must meet in order to receive UK support. The first is a return to peace talks with Israel, and the second, a promise to not pursue Israel through the International Criminal Court. Palestinian diplomats rejected what they called unrealistic demands. Rebels in Syria claimed to have shot down a fighter jet using a ground-to-air missile. That announcement came as air assaults on their strongholds continued. Amateur video shows what it is like to be on the ground right now in Damascus. This video was reportedly taken after Syrian fighter jets dropped bombs on the southern edge of Damascus. President Bashar al-Assad continues to insist that the opposition is made up of terrorist groups trying to destroy Syria. China is playing down criticism of the country's new passports for including disputed territories. On Wednesday, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Hong Lei spoke out.
The issue of the maps in China's new passports should not be read too much into. China is willing to remain in touch with relevant countries to promote the healthy development of the exchange of people between China and the outside world.
The new passports include a map that shows disputed maritime territories. Vietnam and the Philippines recently condemned the new passports. India is also angered about two Himalayan regions that show up as Chinese territory on the new passport and is responding by issuing visas stamped with its own interpretation of the borders. The standoff in the Congo may be nearing an end as rebels announce they're pulling out of the eastern city of Goma. The M23 rebel group has been in control of that city for about a week, demanding national talks with President Kabila and demanding the release of political prisoners. M23 says it isn't giving up on those objectives, but is withdrawing from Goma as a sign of good faith. While the withdrawal appears to have begun, it isn't clear, though, if it will be a total withdrawal, because some M23 leaders say they're staying in Goma. The UN says the rebels are backed by Rwanda. That's the news for now. Let's head over to Phil at the business desk.
With just over 30 days until the fiscal cliff, President Obama met with congressional leaders, small business owners, and CEOs, but still no agreement. Rochelle Okufo explains the president is tapping into one of his most valuable resources to close the deal.
President Obama is trying another approach to tackling the $600 billion fiscal cliff: public pressure.
If there's one thing that I've learned, when the American people speak loudly enough, lo and behold, Congress listens.
Surrounded by middle-class Americans, the president pushed for a consensus, starting with an issue both sides already agree on.
The place where we already have, in theory at least, complete agreement right now is on middle-class taxes.
The president echoed his campaign promises to extend tax cuts for the middle class, but he also assured the wealthy that they too would benefit from a tax break on the first $250,000 they earn. He also cautioned the public about the domino effect a tax hike would have on small businesses.
Economists predict that if taxes go up on the middle class next year, consumers will spend nearly $200 billion less on things like cars and clothes and furniture.
The president turned to a new social media campaign called My2K to add pressure on Congress. Middle-class Americans are voicing their opinions online on how a $2,000 tax hike would affect them.
We are about to lose our home. We have our oldest son going to college, and then we have two other younger ones that also we plan on them being in college, and we are not sure how we are going to pay.
If you're privileged, it seems to me that you've benefited from this country, and you owe a little bit more. You need to pay back a little bit more.
A recent Gallup poll shows members of Congress have reason to be concerned about their current 18% approval rating. In election years when Congress pre-election approval was less than 30%, a relatively high number of seats changed from one party to the other. Public approval hasn't reached 25% since 2009's economic crisis, and it's averaged 17% since 2010 when Republicans took control of the House. The president hopes to reach a deal before Christmas, and so do 114 million middle-class American families. Rochelle Akufo, CCTV, Washington.
And with a possible tax hike on dividends next year, firms are cutting dividend checks to shareholders early to avoid the 2013 tax rates. Ginger Vaughn has more.
Some U.S. firms are paying shareholders early this year as they brace for a possible jump in taxes, as a 15% top tax rate on dividends is scheduled to end in January. If Congress takes no actions, dividends would be taxed at the same rate as salaries and wages. The top rate for dividends would increase to 39.6% under President Obama's plan, pushing some firms to pay shareholders early. Among firms opting to write dividend checks ahead of schedule, giant retailer Walmart said uncertainty prompted to move up its fourth quarter dividend payment from January 2nd to December 27th. You can see here Walmart says there are complex fiscal and federal tax rate issues that may not be resolved in the next few weeks, despite the ongoing good faith negotiations between the administration and Congress to resolve details related to the fiscal cliff. Costco Wholesale, the warehouse merchant, announced that it will pay a special $3 billion dividend before the year's end, along with retailer Dillard's and casino operator Las Vegas Sands. Firms are saying dividends distributed early would save them money and send back hundreds of millions of dividend dollars back to shareholders ahead of tax hikes that could either affect them automatically or as a result of negotiations between the White House and Congress. Ginger Vaughn, CCTV, Houston.
And we head up, as you can see, to New York City, where there you can see the NASDAQ market site, where Karina Huber is standing by with more on today's market action.
Yes, I am, Phil. We were just hearing about those special dividends. That caused one stock to pop today. I'll get into that in just a few seconds. But for the broader market, the stocks reversed course and ended the day solidly higher after upbeat comments from President Obama and House Speaker John Boehner gave investors hope that a compromise on the fiscal cliff will be reached. The Dow, the S&P 500, and the NASDAQ each added nearly 1%, and the gains were really broad-based, with energy and consumer discretionary stocks leading the advance. Now, the stock that popped on the day was Costco. It was the biggest percentage gainer on the S&P 500. It rose more than 6%. The wholesale retailer was the latest company to announce a special one-time dividend. This comes as companies have been bracing for a higher dividend tax rate next year due to the fiscal cliff. And it appears the U.S. housing market recovery remains somewhat uneven. Sales of new single-family homes edged lower in October to an annual rate of 368,000 units. The prior month's sales figures were also revised sharply lower. The Commerce Department said Superstorm Sandy had only a minimal effect on sales activities. Miami's residential real estate, though, is on the sizzle, with prices soaring. That's also helping boost the local economy. But not everyone's cashing in on the red-hot trend. As Nitza Soledad Perez reports, some locals are taking a hit in the pocket.
This family of three has seen their rent go up and up. Marianela, an accountant by training, is carefully evaluating her housing options.
In my situation, we rented this unit 2 years ago. We started paying $2,300, and we renewed the lease last year, paying $2,500. And actually, the intention of the landlord is to increase to $2,800 next year.
The average rent for a two-bedroom apartment increased 6% to $2,568 a month compared to last year in the greater Miami downtown area. If Marianela's landlord increases her rent once again, she might just move her family somewhere else.
When you make numbers about your family and about expenses, the new increase, like the difference, $300, times 12 months is really a lot.
But what is fueling these price increases?
With the recession and a lot of people not able to get loans because they are not qualified due to their credit, maybe they lost their houses in foreclosure, maybe they have a short sale, now their option is to rent.
There's a strong demand for downtown areas like Brickell. The opening of new restaurants, shops, and entertainment spots are helping to create an urban feel more enticing to young professionals and an increasingly diverse crowd. More than 95% of rental units are occupied.
People will not even negotiate. If they like it, they take it, they pay the price.
There's a national push for developers to build more multi-family rental units. But while new rental units become available, the supply will be short, and middle-income households will have to sacrifice chic and trendy for affordable. Nitza Soledad Perez, Cctv, Miami, Florida.
Taking Barack Obama to court, one of China's richest men asks a judge to consider his case against the U.S. president. We'll have the details in a few minutes. Plus, what global downturn? One of Asia's most dynamic economies defies gravity as its economy goes from strength to strength. Find out which country soon.
Take a spark of intuition and a helping of inspiration, a dash of contemplation and a heap of experience. Add a good handful of character, then turn on the heat.
Welcome back to Biz Asia America. Wind farms, politics, and national security. We're talking about a case involving an affiliate of Sony Group. This is one of China's biggest machinery makers and also one of China's biggest private companies. One of Sony's units, RAWS Corporation, a Delaware wind turbine company, wants to build a wind farm in Oregon on the western side of the United States. Now, the CEO of RAWS is Mr. Wu, one of China's richest men. He is also the vice president of Sony Group. The company bought 4 plots of land near a U.S. Navy facility. The deal had to be reviewed by the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, better known as CFIUS, to ensure there is no national security risk. Last August, the committee claimed it had credible evidence that Chinese ownership of the land near the military facility posed a risk, so it prohibited RAWS from building the wind farm. The company has since filed a complaint against that order, but President Obama has backed the CFIUS ban with an executive order refusing to let the company build that wind farm on national security grounds. The company is now suing the president on Wednesday and went back to a D.C. district court to ask the judge to accept the lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of the president's decision.
Our request is this: give us an opportunity for due process. We have no idea why the president and CFIUS decided to take these actions. All we ask for are relative transparency and clear answers.
If the U.S. doesn't want us here, that's fine. We can pull out. But at least give us a legitimate reason why. We're just an ordinary company. It's like the government considers you a criminal when all you've done is work hard, be a good citizen, and follow the rules. What's one supposed to do?
That was Mr. Wu, Raw's CEO and Sony Group Vice President. Some experts believe the administration made the right decision given the circumstances. I spoke to Samuel Mock from the Condor International Advisors. His firm represents international clients in the United States.
Reading information in the public domain, if I were President Obama, I would have made the same decision. So I don't think they really have a very strong case. I'm very surprised that they decided to sue. In my opinion, after reading all the information in the public domain, I think they made at least 5 major missteps. The first one is when they got into the wind farm business in Oregon, they did not talk to Chavez. They should have. If I were their business advisor, I would have asked them to talk to Chavez, the Treasury organization that approved these things, because they're so close to a military base. And from what I read, I don't know this for a fact, that a lot of drones operate out of. So there is some sensitivity there. So that's misstep number 1. Misstep number 2 is from reading in the comments made by the company officials. They talk about discrimination, they talk about deprivation of rights. I think they fail to understand that this company is owned by 2 foreign nationals in Delaware. Foreign nationals do not have the same right as Americans, as American citizens don't have the same right in China.
Do you believe there has been discrimination? I'll put it in 2 different ways. One, the fact that the company is a Chinese-based company. Right. Second, that it is a foreign-based company.
I don't think there are discrimination against the company or the Chinese in this matter, okay? I think there might be bias against foreign companies in general, including Chinese. And I think there might be sensitivities towards Chinese competition. So I don't think it's necessarily personal racism per se. There might be some institutional bias against foreign companies in general, Chinese companies in particular.
Despite Europe's debt crisis, Chinese businesses are increasingly looking at the region as a promising investment destination. Constantino de Miguel sends us this report from the outskirts of Paris, where Chinese entrepreneurs are thriving.
This is Aubervilliers in the north of Paris. This area has become the biggest European hub of import and export of textiles made in China. 300,000 square meters of warehouses that are actually the property of this man, Monsieur Wang Sheng. He arrived in France as a poor immigrant. Now he's the owner of Eurasia, a company with a turnover of 22 million euros. What's the secret of his success?
Our secret of success is that we are hard workers and we don't complain. Besides, we don't spend much. We keep our expenditures under control. That's why we have a business advantage over other people.
For the first time ever, there are more Chinese companies buying European ones than vice versa. And this area, Aubervilliers, to the north of Paris, is the best example of this Chinese landing. The French Chinese have invested over 5 billion euros in 20 years with 35,000 small companies like these wholesale clothing shops. Financial solidarity and commercial prowess have been the key to success, but now the crisis is denting profits.
Yes, our business is being affected by the crisis because clients, instead of buying in big amounts, they are now making smaller purchases.
Direct investment in Europe now represents 10% of Chinese foreign investment. It was just 3% 3 years ago. But with an economy on the verge of deflation, the return on that investment is, for the moment, very low. Constantino de Miguel, Cctv, Paris.
While the developed world may be struggling, other developing countries are defying the odds. Indonesia's economy will grow at more than 6% for the next 4 years. That makes the country one of the most resilient. Andy Saputra reports.
A shining gem in times of uncertainty. One of the fastest growing economy in the G20. This is the curious case of Indonesian economy. Hit hard by the 1997 Asian financial crisis and the political turmoil that ensued, Indonesia has posted its highest growth since then. So what makes this seemingly chaotic economic cogs and wheels work so well amidst global slowdown?
Our economic growth around 6.5 to the last year, and we predict to have another 6.5 in this year. So I think Indonesia is very interesting for investors. If you look at about our consumption, domestic consumption last year, up about 55% of the GDP, compared to China around 50%. I think that's another indicator.
And it is shown here, bumper to bumper traffic, all Indonesians' daily torment, but also a testament of Indonesia's domestic consumption prowess. With almost 900,000 cars sold this year alone, Indonesia's car sales is near record levels, outperforming its neighbor Thailand. Toyota has just announced that it will open a second plant in Indonesia to meet the growing demand, and they are not the only ones, setting Indonesia's investment growth at a landmark level. But its biggest challenges remain.
We are coming into the industry, big industry in Indonesia. So infrastructure is the foundation for the industrial development for the future.
The president has proposed increasing infrastructure spending to $20 billion next year to relieve the overburdened infrastructures, roads, railways, airports, and ports that will be crucial to remove the bottlenecks and expand the economy further.
With all the pieces coming together, Indonesia is set to stake its claim as Southeast Asia's largest economy. The biggest challenge now, perhaps, is how to realize that economic potential. Andy Saputra, Cctv, Jakarta.
The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or the OECD, tackles economic, social, and leadership issues in over 40 countries. Richard Hurd is the senior economist and head of China, explains the biggest risks for the global economy.
The European governments somehow delay too long in settling some of the crises that are there in Greece, in Spain, and perhaps in a few other European countries. Delay, I think, here could spark another crisis and push up bond yields and push the economy down into an even prolong the recession that we see happening already in Europe. And the second risk, of course, comes from the United States, where the different arms of government, Congress, Senate, and the President, have yet to agree on a way to avoid the automatic increases in taxes and cuts in expenditure that are scheduled to come in at the beginning of 2013.
In the face of all these different headwinds, I sense a little bit of optimism from your report.
Well, I think as far as this year goes, I wouldn't say that Europe has been quite good. I mean, in half of the countries in Europe, GDP is actually going to fall. The figures vary, of course, from country to country, but at the one extreme you have Greece, where GDP is dropped by 6%, likely to drop by 6% this year, and there's a whole range of other countries where GDP is dropping by 2%, so you're getting Europe in recession.
Specifically, let's talk about China. There was a lot of talk earlier this year, concerns that perhaps the landing in China may be a little bit harder than first thought, but in your report and your forecast, you're citing a soft landing, and in fact, you see a potential rebound.
I think all the evidence is there now that the economy is recovering. I think the reason for that is that the slowdown in China was really a policy-induced slowdown. The government wanted to reduce inflation from 6%. It's got it down now to 2%, under 2%. It wanted to stabilize housing prices, which, you know, in 2010 had risen by 50%. They wanted to stabilize those. That's been achieved too. And so as a result of that, there's been some policy easing in China. You've seen interest rates dropping quite significantly in the market, and you've seen also quite significant increases in government expenditure.
I want to come back to that event, the 18th Party Congress, which you mentioned a bit earlier that was a fairly significant event. How has that affected the forecast?
Well, I think going out into 2014, it's a positive impact for the forecast, because the statements that were made at the 18th Party Congress, they announced a series of reforms that they would like to put into place over a 10-year period, in fact. But presumably they're going to start introducing some of those reforms fairly quickly. In particular, they emphasize the role of keeping a level playing field between private firms and state firms, and also giving a much greater role to the market rather than to government, rolling back the influence of government on the economy. And those really, we think, are positive factors for growth.
More signs of weakness in the Japanese economy as newly released data show retail sales falling 1.2% for the month of October. Our reporter Mike Fern is in Tokyo with more. Mike, how significant are these new figures?
Well, if you were the Prime Minister that introduced legislation to double the sales tax and you saw the first drop in retail sales in 3 months, just about 2.5 weeks ahead of an election, you would be worried. It is nearly double economists' forecasts. A couple of reasons for that. We had an end to eco-car incentives. Also, it's been fairly warm for this time of year, so people haven't been buying their winter clothing. We saw a bigger drop at large retailers, the department stores, the supermarkets. That was a drop of 2.4%. Now, we did have one stimulus package. The Prime Minister expecting to announce another one Friday, 880 billion yen worth of stimulus paid for from reserve funds, not by issuing new debt. This is the second in 2 months, though. A lot of concern, though, that he's doing this because the election's coming up and he wants to get some popularity.
More data is set to be released in the next day, Mike. What should we expect now?
Well, that's not really going to be good news for the ruling party either, because the economy looks fairly shaky. The jobless rate probably unchanged, but fewer jobs per 100 applicants, down to 80. Deflation continuing, national CPI taking out fresh food down 0.1%, same as the previous month. Household spending off nearly 1%, and industrial production sliding a whopping 8%, same as the previous month. We have seen a big drop-off in exports, particularly to China, but also to Europe. The yen has been weakening, but still reasonably strong, hurting companies. We did have Sony, Panasonic reporting record losses in the past year and saying that the next year looks fairly grim. So it isn't looking great for the economy at the moment.
All right, Mike, you've got your hands full there. Thank you very much. In Latin America, poverty is at the lowest in nearly 30 years. The United Nations says nearly 1 million people were lifted out of poverty this year alone. Thanks to the booming exports, people's incomes are up. Argentina, Uruguay, and Chile have the lowest poverty rates in the region. Paraguay, Colombia, and the Dominican Republic have the highest. Up next on the show, one of the biggest lotteries in U.S. history. We will show you the rush for the $550 million jackpot, plus the violence along the Israel-Gaza Strip is endangering the most fragile of all, children. We'll explore the tragic effects.
In a business world of information overload, we strip away the complexity and confusion to give you the essence of financial news. Pure value. Biz Asia America.
Welcome back to Biz Asia America. I'm Elaine Reyes. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is presenting his bid for non-member UN status on Thursday, the 65th anniversary of the UN's resolution to partition Palestine. Israeli leaders say the bid undermines peace efforts and avowed retribution. CCTV's Stephanie Fareed reports from the West Bank.
Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is going to the UN again, a year after he asked the international body for statehood. The bid failed because of U.S. opposition. This time the bid is for non-member status, and it can't be vetoed by the U.S. Israeli leaders say the move sidesteps peace negotiations, but Palestinian leaders maintain there is no peace process.
And we are determined to get our freedom. We know there is a price for freedom, and there is pain that we have to endure, but there is nothing that can stop us from proceeding with demanding UN membership.
The underlying threat is that non-member status could provide the Palestinian Authority with access to The Hague, where they can sue Israel for West Bank policy, which threatens Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu as he heads into elections.
It's a defeat for him to see the Palestinians go to the United Nations. He made it look like a grand defeat. He was willing even to sort of exchange it for stopping the war talk about Iran if the Americans would put all the pressure on the Palestinians not to go to the United Nations. So going to the United Nations is a defeat for him.
The U.S. is threatening to cut aid to the Palestinian Authority if the bid continues, which could further cripple a hurting economy and destabilize the West Bank. Nonetheless, the delegation is pressing on.
Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas took a bid to the UN last year for Palestinian statehood. That bid was vetoed. He's taking a downgraded bid this year to the UN. The point here is to keep the Palestinian cause on the table and alive as peace efforts remain stalled and Israel continues building settlements. Stephanie Fareed, CCTV, Ramallah.
And with the UN vote set for Thursday afternoon in New York on enhanced status for the Palestinians, countries are starting to declare how they will vote. While the Palestinian Authority is expected to easily get the required majority in the General Assembly, the margin of victory and the need to get as many powerful countries on board is now the focus. Nathan King is at the United Nations headquarters with more.
Yes, that's right, Elaine. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is here. He just met with UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. He also met earlier in the day with senior US diplomats who basically told him that this vote was counterproductive and would do nothing towards getting a viable Palestinian state. They, of course, will vote no tomorrow. Remember, last year they effectively derailed a bid for full membership of the United Nations by the Palestinians by threatening to veto it in the Security Council. Other countries that are going to say no, Israel, of course, also in the no column, Canada and Germany. As you can see on the screen, several other countries, especially from Europe, as well. The United Kingdom and Australia are going to abstain. The UK are worried that the Palestinians are going to use their enhanced status at the United Nations to bring potential war crimes charges and charges against Israel in the International Criminal Court. And addressing that was UK Foreign Secretary William Hague in the British Parliament.
We would ultimately like to see a Palestinian state represented throughout all the organs of the United Nations. However, we judge that if the Palestinians were to build on this resolution by pursuing ICC jurisdiction over the occupied territories at this stage, it could make a return to negotiations impossible.
That leads us, of course, to who will back the Palestinian bid for enhanced non-member observer status, and the overwhelming majority of the 193-member General Assembly behind me. We're expecting between about 150 and 170 votes for. On the screen you can see some big names that are going to vote for it. China, of course, India, France was the first European country to come out, as well as many African countries, and of course basically all of the Arab League as well. So it'll be an overwhelming majority here.
Well, Nathan, when this passes, what difference will it make to the Palestinians and the peace process?
I think for the average Palestinian on the street in West Bank or Gaza, it means very little immediately. What it does do for the Palestinian Authority is enhance their international status, and some would argue they need it, especially as Hamas has been on the ascendancy during the Gaza violence. It also brings the whole idea of a two-state solution, a Palestinian state back into the front burner, if you like, of international relations. And it does, and this is where things could change, it allows the Palestinians to enter into full debates here at the General Assembly and join many of the UN bodies and related international organisations as well. We mentioned the International Criminal Court, but there are a lot of them as well. But in terms of actually advancing the peace process, Palestinians said it will put them on a better footing. Israel, however, says this is a unilateral move and that it will actually stop them from going back to the peace table as well. So it looks like it could do more harm than good in terms of Israel.
Gaza has one of the youngest populations in the world. Over half of its 1.7 million residents are under the age of 18, and many have now lived through 2 wars with Israel. Mental health professionals say the repeated exposure to the often shocking levels of violence have left many of Gaza's children suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Kate Parkinson reports.
Back to school, but not back to normal. These children are still coming to terms with what happened during Israel's week-long bombardment of Gaza. 13-year-old Saad lost 6 of his cousins. He says the memory of seeing their bodies still haunts him.
When I remember that scene, I feel my body shudder. Deep inside, I imagine being in their place and people looking at my dead body. It's too much to bear. It was so terrible.
Death and destruction have become part of life for Gaza's children, and their trauma is exacerbated by repeated exposure.
It's actually very hard also to speak about post-traumatic stress disorder when the trauma keeps going on and keeps recurring. So it's no longer an event which happens in your life and then you have the time to deal with it, but it's something that keeps happening, and that's what these children keep witnessing.
The Palestinian Center for Human Rights says 34 children were killed during the 8-day war and hundreds more were wounded. Those who survived are still struggling to piece together what happened.
16-year-old Mazen and his family were at home when a missile struck the house next door. They all managed to escape, but as you can see, their house was completely destroyed.
All my life changed, from good things to bad things. You can say from 100 to 0. It had been destroyed. I don't know what I do now. I don't know.
It will take time for Gaza to repair the damage of war, but it will take far longer for the mental scars to heal. Kate Parkinson, CCTV, Gaza.
Protesters voicing their anger at Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi don't show any signs of leaving Tahrir Square. There could be an end in sight, however. The assembly group writing Egypt's new constitution says it is nearing a final draft. The Muslim Brotherhood reportedly sees that as a way out of the crisis by limiting the power Morsi has. 2 people have been killed during the last 6 days of protests in Cairo. Morsi supporters are planning their own rally for Saturday. 3 supervisors at a garment factory in Bangladesh are under arrest linked to a fire that left more than 100 people dead. Investigators have said they believe sabotage is to blame for the blaze, the worst such industrial fire in the country's history. Clothing at several of the biggest U.S. retailers, including Sears and Walmart, is linked to that particular factory. Police are investigating complaints that managers stopped workers from leaving when the fire alarm went off. Argentina is continuing its efforts to convict former military officers accused of committing human rights violations during the country's bloody dictatorship in the 1970s and 80s. A trial began Wednesday in Buenos Aires that could send many of them to jail for life. CCTV's Brian Burns has the story.
The 68 former officers now on trial in Argentina include 8 former pilots accused of taking part in death flights in which prisoners were drugged and then thrown alive into the waters of the Rio de la Plata near Buenos Aires. The trial is the 3rd one in recent years against former military members accused of human rights abuses during Argentina's so-called Dirty War, which took place from 1976 to 1983.
This is the ASMA, the Argentine Naval Mechanics School in Buenos Aires.
where political prisoners were raped, tortured, and murdered by the Argentine military. During the 7-year dictatorship, some 5,000 people passed through these gates. Only 200 of them survived. Human rights groups estimate 30,000 people died during the military's reign. Amnesty laws protecting officers were stripped in 2003, and since then, activists say Argentina has come closer to justice with each trial.
The fact that 68 of them had to walk into the courtroom in handcuffs really makes me happy. It makes me so happy because it means all we fought over for the past 34 years wasn't in vain. For a long time, we were pretty much fighting alone. But in the end, the saying, the only fight you lose is the one you give up, was proven to be true.
Some 900 people are expected to testify in the 789 cases involved in the trial, which will likely last at least 2 years. Brian Burns, Cctv, Buenos Aires.
There's a lot of speculation swirling in Venezuela about the current health status of President Hugo Chavez. The 58-year-old leader flew to Cuba on Wednesday for treatment to reduce bone decay caused when he underwent radiation therapy for cancer. Chavez maintains that he's been cancer-free for months. While Chavez is away, his newly appointed vice president, Nicolas Maduro, is taking over. This comes just weeks before Venezuela's state elections on December 16th. People across the United States on Wednesday were lining up to buy Powerball lottery tickets. The jackpot for the drawing, which will happen less than 2 hours from now, has been climbing and climbing and now stands at a record amount. Craig Morrow has our story from Chicago.
Can I get 10 on one and then one by itself?
Wednesday's $500 million jackpot is an unimaginable sum of money for most people. We found many who said they'd do more with it than just help themselves if they win.
Take care of family and friends.
Help people too, but I just take some of the places I've never been, take off.
Share it. Family, friends, and people who need it.
The record-setting jackpot is the result of recent moves, including an increase in ticket prices meant to boost lottery revenue for the states that run it. Total Powerball sales are expected to reach $5 billion this year, another record. Each of these tickets costs $2. Now what they do is they set aside one of those dollars for the prize money. Now, the rest of the revenues from ticket sales, after covering administrative costs, each state decides what it wants to do with the money. It can set it aside for specific expenditures like education, or it can put it into a general fund to supplement tax revenue. The odds of actually winning Wednesday's jackpot are 1 in 175 million. The number of likelier happenings seems limitless. You're more likely to get struck by lightning multiple times, for example, or even to get killed by a falling coconut. And winner beware, previous winners in the U.S. have suffered through costly divorces, attempts on their lives, and many strained relationships.
Winning the lottery is obviously a wonderful event, but it's all about your coping skills going into something that really changes your life entirely, that will predict whether ultimately this will be a happy event or not.
Still, to many, millions in fact, it's too hard to resist buying at least one ticket. Somebody, after all, is going to win all that money. Craig Morrow, Cctv, Chicago.
China's economy shows more signs of returning to robust growth, but the U.S. fiscal cliff may get in the way. And withering Windows 8, Microsoft's much-hyped operating system comes crashing down to earth as critics slam its interface. Details in just a few minutes on Biz Asia America.
Across China, every day, 700 million people watch the channels of China Central Television. Broadcasting in 6 languages around the world.
This is China Central Television.
La televisión central.
37 channels in China.
也 get 到点。
It's the first time.
我现在是在伊拉克发生了枪击事件。
我现在是在海地太子港，感受到飓风艾琳已经到达斯科。
温哥华、阿拉巴马州、华盛顿报道。
Reaching 200 million viewers in more than 170 countries. Plus, many more online and through new media platforms. China Central Television.
Welcome back to Biz Asia America. I'm Karina Huber at the NASDAQ market site in Times Square, New York. Now, China's economy may be showing signs of returning to form, but concerns over the U.S. economy and the so-called fiscal cliff may take their toll on the mainland's recovery. Kathy Yang has the latest from Hong Kong. Kathy?
And the growing risk of a recession in the U.S. comes on top of the fact that Europe is now in recession, Karina. That's why economists such as Joy Yang of Mirae tell me a recession in the U.S. will pose significant risks to China's recovery. Europe and the U.S. already account for almost 40% of China's total exports, so a further slump in demand will weigh on China's trade.
Even if China continues its strong export growth to the other part of Asia, I think if U.S. is going to fall into a recession, then definitely we will have to revise down our GDP growth for China for 2013.
Strong domestic demand in Asia, though, helping offset sluggish demand in the West. The Philippines, the only economy in the world which the IMF believes will grow faster than earlier forecast, beat third-quarter growth estimates, leading growth in Southeast Asia. Neighboring Thailand on Wednesday left rates steady, betting on a global recovery. Brian Jackson of Coot says, despite the risks of a global recession, he thinks China is confident of a global recovery. And that's because China's central bank's allowing its currency to strengthen further. Just minutes ago, Karina, the Chinese central bank set the midpoint slightly weaker than Wednesday's, setting it at 629.10 per dollar. So we'll see how traders interpret that. And we're only a few hours away from insurer PICC's pricing of its initial public offering here in Hong Kong. Sources telling IFR PICC will likely price at the lower quarter of the indicative range, which would raise about $3 billion. PICC is said to be the biggest to list here in 2 years. To the broader market action, the Nikkei 225 in Tokyo rebounds after a one-week closing low on Wednesday, and shares in Seoul up over 0.5% after retreating from a 3-week high, and those in Sydney up slightly, with Rio Tinto saying it is cautiously optimistic about a pickup in growth in its biggest customer, China. Back to you.
Kathy Yang with the latest market action in Asia. Thanks so much. Let's head over to Canadian company Research in Motion. It has a patent dispute with Nokia that has heated up. A Swedish arbitrator has ruled RIM is not allowed to sell devices using Nokia's Wi-Fi connectivity technologies until it agrees to pay royalties to the Finnish company. Meanwhile, Nokia has filed cases in the U.S., Britain, and Canada to enforce the ruling and ban sales of BlackBerry smartphones, which would affect all current BlackBerries. This is RIM's latest legal battle as it gets set to launch its operating system that could decide its fate. A month after all the hoopla at its launch, Windows 8 doesn't seem to be living up to the hype. So far, most analysts say sales have been far below expectations. Mark New takes a look at why.
After $1 billion of promotion and 1 billion hours of testing, Windows 8 is off to a slow start. The man dubbed the guru of web usability, Jacob Nielsen, calls Windows 8 on mobile devices and tablets Dr. Jekyll, a tortured soul hoping for redemption, and on PCs, Mr. Hyde, a monster that terrorizes poor office workers and strangles their productivity. Raluca Badu did the research for the Nielsen study that provoked this withering review.
Unfortunately, it was quite hard for them to find their way around Windows 8. It was hard to find controls and buttons and interact with the applications overall.
12 experienced users spent 90 minutes trying to complete 18 tasks. Most people had difficulty on all of them, like this one, trying to change the home city for the weather. I had trouble too. Every single user failed this test, trying to add a recipe to a list of favorites and then delete it from the list.
You did it.
All right.
Yeah.
But when I tried to repeat the same task a few minutes later, I forgot how I'd done it.
The problem was that you were trying to
to use the swipe on the recipe page, but instead you should have used it here. So people usually have trouble remembering that these menus can vary.
Bourdieu says swiping inconsistencies and poor screen space plague the system.
You're going to see a really big picture of a person, and then the text is occupies only maybe a third of the screen.
The traditional Windows desktop view is still available as a crutch, but Bourdieu says users ended up going through too many unnecessary steps to switch between modes, instead of just running them side by side.
A lot of it is contextual. You have to remember not only where to go, but also where to go for a specific app.
Critics of the Nielsen-Norman study say everyone needs time to learn something radically different. Bourdieu agrees, but says the product will get better a lot faster if Microsoft heeds the study's advice. Mark New, CCTV, Mountain View, California.
For more news on the energy sector, let's head to Phil in D.C.
Thanks, Karina. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, has blocked the British oil giant from getting new federal contracts. The regulator is citing BP's lack of business integrity in reaction to the cleanup of the Gulf of Mexico disaster. BP pled guilty to criminal charges linked to the Deepwater Horizon that left 11 people dead. The resulting spill is considered America's biggest environmental disaster ever. Next year, Shanghai will be one of the first Chinese cities to adopt tougher car emission standards. Some say electric cars could be the answer to pollution problems. Zhang Ting reports it will take time before they become popular.
Environmental authorities in the city say the new emission standard is expected to reduce car pollution by at least 30%. Many automakers say they are willing to promote clean energy vehicles, like electric cars, to meet the requirements of the environmental protection. But one person in the industry says the investment in clean energy cars is still very limited due to the small market.
Our major investment is still in upgrading traditional technologies. The investment in new energy vehicles can only show a return in the future. When we can't see a clear market, we're cautious to put money into it.
The China Association of Automobile Manufacturers say up to 120,000 electric cars could be sold nationwide in 2015. But even that number only represents 1% of all cars sold in China. Ma said car makers have to lower the price of electric vehicles, but domestic automakers don't have the core technologies to do that.
What we do now is assemble cars based on core technologies of foreign companies. If we have these technologies, we can lower the cost, and customers can prefer to buy them for the sake of environmental protection.
In order to promote electric cars, China has been offering subsidies of up to 60,000 yuan for each purchase since 2010. In addition, Shanghai will give owners of electric cars free license plates starting at the end of this year. Normally, plates in the city cost more than 60,000 yuan each. But money isn't the only problem.
One of the biggest problems is where to charge the car battery. Neither customers nor auto companies can solve it, but the government can. In America, many public parking lots and companies' parking areas have charging poles.
So far, Shanghai has about 330 charging sites, but almost all of them are in suburban Jiading district. Only 10 charging stations are located downtown, and many drivers have complained they are too far away from residential areas. Molly Huan, ICS for CCTV, Shanghai.
For more on climate change, we're joined by Rachel Kite, World Bank Vice President for Sustainable Development Network. Thank you very much for joining us on the show. Normally we talk about business, but this certainly has a lot to do with business, but it's quite different. I'm looking at a new report from the World Bank now that you guys just released. Are there any surprises in that report that you found particularly interesting?
Well, thank you for inviting us. The report, Turn Down the Heat, is a summary of the climate science, and the conclusion of the report is that we are headed, unless we take aggressive climate mitigation action, for a world that will warm by 4 degrees centigrade over pre-industrial levels. And what the report shows is that we really don't want to experience that world. The impact of the world warming to 4 degrees is a world where 35% of the cropland in Africa is going to be unusable, a world where the coastal cities of the world are going to have to invest billions in their own resilience. And so
I'm going to help you be doomsday here, because I read part of that report, and basically talking about the waters rising from the sea.
Yeah.
It's bad for growing crops. It's bad for the weather. It means more disasters, more deaths, more damage. There's nothing good that comes out of raising the worldwide temperature by 4 degrees.
That's right.
But what's even more frustrating than that is the fact that this is not something new. We've known about this problem for some, although some may disagree with global warming trends, but the point is most agree. Why is it so difficult to get governments and people and organizations together to fight this common problem that we all have, regardless of where you sit geographically?
Well, I think first of all, it's only really in recent years that the preponderance of the science concludes that this is due to human activity. So 96% of scientists agree that that is the cause. Therefore, we shouldn't be really arguing about the science anymore. But I think that most people, or a lot of people, have tended to think that climate change is something that's going to happen to somebody else in the future. And now, whether it's
not my problem,
right? But now with Superstorm Sandy, with the volatility of weather events, with the kinds of food price shocks that we're seeing, in part due to climate events, it's now something that happens to me, and it's happening now. And I think you're starting to see a change in opinion as a result of that.
We were having this conversation, myself and some other journalists in the newsroom the other day, and we talked about Hurricane Sandy, we talked about the droughts. You know, it's always a record of something bad that has happened someplace on Earth. And I'm wondering how much of that is related to your report of global warming?
I think a considerable amount. We can't say that all of these events are exactly tied to climate change, but what we can say is that the volatility of the climate, the intensity of extreme weather events, their frequency is certainly increasing with a tremendous cost. The economic cost of this is enormous, and so the volatility of what's happening to the climate is something which means that governments and business leaders have to find a way to not only manage risk, but manage through uncertainty, and that has a cost associated with it.
What do you hope to accomplish with the report? And I suppose one of the group audiences is governments, and what's the one thing you would want the governments to do if they could take action today? What would that be?
We're an evidence-based organisation. We wanted to see what the evidence was saying. We wanted to hold the evidence up and say, this is something that needs to be front of mind. And so in our conversation with our clients, who are the developing countries around the world, we want to be changing the conversation into what are the opportunities for moving their growth path to be one that's greener, less carbon intensive, and more efficient.
Rachel Kite from the World Bank, thank you so much on this very important topic. I wish we had more time on this, but we'll have you back again.
Thank you very much.
And that does it for the show today. We leave you now with pictures from beautiful Hawaii. It is the World Cup of Surfing for you surfer fans. Some of the world's best surfers are gathering at Sunset Beach in Oahu to catch a wave. At the Bonsai Pipeline, I have no idea what I'm talking about, but you surfers certainly do. For Elaine, Karina, and myself, thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
CCTV English News, a 24-hour news channel for a global audience.
Ni hao, thanks for your company. I'm Edwin Marr in Beijing.
Hello and welcome to Channel 24, the latest news.
Folks, welcome to this news update on CCTV News.
CCTV News reaching 85 million viewers in more than 100 countries and regions, providing a link to Asia and broader news perspectives from all over the world.
Senior history.
This work is being drawing on reports from 70 international news bureaus and 300 correspondents. CCTV News provides different views of the world. From Nairobi, a new broadcast center with special programming covering the African continent.
From all across the Americas, stories of people, their hopes, aspirations, hard-hitting investigations, cultural and social insights.
Michelle Bege for America's Now, Guatemala.
Dan Collins for America's Now, Lima.
Michael Voss, CCTV, Havana.
A weekly news magazine of the Americas. America's Now.
There is no more they, or you, or me. In today's economic landscape, there is only we. An interconnected world of business, trade, and investment. Daily coverage told simply, with insight and new perspectives. Biz Asia America, our world of business.